Alrighty, so it looks like we got everyone in here. I'm sure some people will keep trickling in, but uh, hello and welcome. My name is Tony Fazzino, and I am the trap support specialist here at Pig Brig Trap Systems. The webinar today is Evolving Your Feral Pig Trapping Game. Before we start, I'd just like to cover a few things. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the next few weeks. Please note that at any time during the webinar, you can use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We're going to save those questions for the end, though, so don't be too concerned if we don't answer them during the presentation. We'll answer those at the end. You can also chat with other people using the chat widget there. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Aaron Sumrall, and he's going to be presenting today. You have our attention.
I appreciate it, Tony. Appreciate all of y'all joining me this afternoon, and as we go through and talk a little bit about what we need to keep in mind with moving into a new season, new trapping approach, and what you may be able to do with some of those options that are out there, and some of those concerns that you may have or you may see in the field. So. This is going to get a little bit more in depth than what we've typically done in the past. So I think most everyone that's on here is probably an owner, at least a trapper, obviously. So we're going to go and push on into that advanced level, more specifics information as we go into this presentation tonight. So, like Tony said, we're going to be answering questions tonight until you run out of questions if there's something that comes up. So, as we're going through the content here, don't delay and putting those questions in the Q&A. That way we can make sure that we're watching them as they go through, or as we go through the presentation. And then when we get to the end of it, then we will make sure that we cover all those questions. So sometimes those questions at the end, they lead to others that may jog others' memories out there. So again, what we're going to do tonight, we'll start off with just basically tonight we're going to focus a lot on pig brig usage, just the trap systems that you're most familiar with and that we know that are unbelievably effective. And then now we're going to talk about it tonight about how to up that game and be more effective in what we do. But first things first is we need to think about the way that the sounders are going to change and how they're going to evolve going out of that summer into the fall and winter time frame. And some of the things that you may see that you definitely need to take into account whenever you start putting that trapping strategy behind or in place. So whenever I start going into the fall of the year again too, I'm going to do my reconnaissance and whether that's on a bait pile or just observations that are out there and how pigs are interacting crossing fields, or if they're at a deer feeder, whatever the case may be. But one of the things that's definitely something to keep in mind is regarding bred females or the females of little pigs on side. So whenever we get out there in the fall of the year, sometimes especially if you're like where Tony and I are in Texas, we've had a pretty wet year this year, and we haven't had that fall off that we typically see in the summertime, where we may end up going into the fall with a lot of open females. We've got a lot of pigs on the ground right now. I know that there's a big chunk of the Southeast that's in the same situation, where there's been ample nutrition throughout the summer, and that's just not typical. So when we come into the fall of the year, we quite likely are going to see a lot of bred females out there, females that have piglets on side. And the reason that this draws concern here, or consideration as far as trapping game, is everything out there in the woods, predator wise, bobcats, coyotes, things like that, they all like bacon bits too. So whenever we start thinking about those piglets on side, the sow is going to always, obviously she's going to be a good mom no matter what. So what that means, if you got those little pigs on side, then she's going to keep those pigs moving to keep those predators off balance. So you may have a food resource there that's ample, that can be fed on for weeks on end, and the pigs are on it. You think, I've got a little time to work with, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared, and we really don't know why they disappeared, anything like that. Think about those piglets on side, because if that sow keeps those piglets in a given location for too long, it's going to allow those predators to hone in on those piglets and start pecking them off. So what you think about in that situation, though, is that those sounders, all female led sounders. So if you see an adult male inside a sounder, he's there for breeding purposes only. So his head's not working. So we need to think about it. If you see those piglets on side, and those females are going to start moving those piglets around, they will stay in the same movement rotation as they would if they were open. So they may just stay in a given location longer should they be open, But if you know that they're going to move from point A to point B, it's because that's what they've done for the last several years. They're going to continue to move in that same format. But if pigs are on side, they may move quicker. So whenever we think about trapping with a lot of small piglets on side, we may want to think about trapping them instead of catching them at A location where they're at right now. You may think about catching them at B location where they're going to be moving to, because you got more time to work with, because we may not know how long they've been at A location to begin with. So the other thing to think about going into the fall of the year is that whenever we start trapping, we start doing our reconnaissance, our camera evaluations, and so forth. If you start seeing a lot of females that are heavy bred, that are springing pretty good, they will also isolate themselves just like a cow will or a doe deer will or anything like that to give birth. So whenever you start seeing some of your numbers falling off, because we do want to catch that full sounder. If you go from a sounder that had 10 females in it to now, it's the same sounder because you can identify animals in there, but you've now dropped from 10 adult females down to 6 or 7 adult females. We may want to think about waiting and giving them the chance to put those piglets on the ground so we can catch that full sounder, and instead of catching that partial sounder and then taking the chance on educating those other females that are off giving birth. So that's a situation you're going to have to make the decision, I guess, at the time that you see that. But bred females or females with piglets are going to change things up quite a lot. Open females, again, that's something that we're thinking about with regard to nutrition. That those open females, they are trying to put their body into condition to breed again. And in the fall of the year, we typically see a lot of natural nutrition hit the ground. So they're going to stay on those food resources a lot longer than those females that have piglets on side, or those bred females that are going to isolate themselves to have pigs. So whenever you see those open females on side, then also too start being mindful that that might be the opportunity that some of those older boars that you've been having trouble with catching over the last couple of years or whatever, then that would be a situation, if you've got a lot of open females, that you may want to condition just a little bit longer to make sure that those bigger boars have the chance to find those females and to start intermingling into that sounder themselves. Because again, too, just like a whitetail buck, in the fall of the year, I think they take their brain out and start playing with it because they're not using it. So the boars are the same way. They're gonna be a lot less wary, a lot less alert whenever it's time for breeding to take place. Other situations to keep in mind is like your bobcats or your coyotes. Again, too, referring back to those females with piglets, is obviously that coyote's not going to be a concern for an adult animal, but that those predator populations can cause those animals to move along a little bit more. If you're in country that have bears, if the bear populations are pretty high, then we know that we don't have a situation that's favorable to keep pigs on bait if a bear shows up. So if that situation is in your wheelhouse there, where you've got several bears to keep to think about, give me or Tony or anybody on the Pig Brig team a call. We can get you the document out there on the capsaicin and what we use to keep bears back. It'll help out keeping your deer back as well, and it won't push those pigs back. So that's something that we can send you that document, how to put that together in the mixtures, and you can pick up everything at your local grocery store, pretty much, your hardware store, to take care of that. Increased boar numbers over the course of the summer. I know there's been quite a few that's posted on Facebook owners group that have caught some pretty good numbers all throughout the summer with a lot of females. So in that situation, if you got increased boar numbers, don't get discouraged if you have a lot of single catches. We'll talk a little bit more about those boar numbers later on, where you can try to expedite the removal if you have a lot of boars in an area, where you can knock those numbers down pretty quickly. But don't get discouraged if you do have a lot of boars, or you have bred females that don't want to mingle with boars. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. The last thing that we're going to talk about here on this slide, though, are the bachelor groups that are out there. So the sounder composition is always going to be made up of that adult female and then other adult females there. You got the one matriarch that's going to lead the sounder, and then other adult females there and their piglets. Well, whenever little boar pigs get to about weaning age, maybe just a little above weaning age, that sub-adult age, those females are gonna expel those boars out of that sounder. So whenever you have those bachelor group of boars there that you may have had pigs over the summer, you could see those bachelor group of boars out there wreaking havoc. And sometimes it's what we see with those bachelor groups is, man, that's the high school age pigs, basically, if you want to put it in context of people. And they really don't have any guidance. They don't know what to do or where to go. So if you see any atypical behavior, that can very much be a bachelor group of boars that's out there, and we need to treat it as such, and still stay consistent, stay patient. Other things that's going to be out there, I guess, more so along the same thread as those bachelor groups of boars, is I know a lot of y'all are probably going to be taken to the woods and the fields and such, deer hunting. I think dove season started up pretty much all over this last weekend, or will be in some of the other states maybe. So there's some opportunity there that if you get the chance to rehabilitate a pig from a deer stand, most of you are going to probably do that. Well, if that happens to be the adult female that's the matriarch of that sounder that you remove out of that herd, then that's going to throw basically the leadership within that herd into I guess a chaotic state until that, I guess, dominant structure can rework itself and there can be another matriarchal female identified within that sounder. If that's the case and you've shot that female, that matriarchal female out of that sounder, then that sounder of adult females that have been guided by that matriarch, they can start behaving much like those bachelor group of males because they've always just followed her leadership, and she's not there anymore. They'll act a lot like those bachelor groups. So think about that as you start moving around and start assessing what you have on your cameras. Now, going into bait situations, some things out there. Think about your baits that you're selecting. Make sure that one of those baits that you select is something that you know that's worked for you in the past. I don't think this is getting into this fall and winter time of the year, especially later into the fall, into the winter. Whenever that natural food availability starts to decrease, you're going to have a pretty dang good chance of removing a lot of pigs with a proper strategy, proper protocol. And that's not the time to start using test baits. So if it's something you know that's performed for you in the past, that's something that I would stick to. Sometimes we get people that ask questions about baits and what to use in a given area, and we can make regional recommendations. But sometimes we have people that say, "Well, why didn't you make a certain recommendation for a bait that we know that it works in a given location?" Well, if those animals haven't been exposed to it, those pigs haven't been exposed to it, they don't know what it is, then they can very much shy away from that bait. Case in point for basically where I'm at is we don't have soybeans. And I know that there's a lot of times that you can use roasted soybeans to try to keep bears back and keep pigs on bait. Pig wouldn't know what to do with a soybean here. So that's something that we make sure that we consider regions where you're at as far as what may be a viable bait for you. But the old things tried and true is that your dry shell corn is going to be something that's globally at the top of the list. Now, yeah, there's going to be those regional preferences out there that may be more efficient for you. So in the cases is in places where they grow peanuts. Peanuts a heck of a high protein content, and especially if you've got open females trying to physiologically reset their body for breeding, they're going to be looking for that high protein source rather than that 7, 8, 9% crude protein corn. So whatever you've got in your area, yes, there can be regional preferences, but remember, whatever you select to use in that trapping approach, don't change the baits halfway through that process. If you're working with pigs there that could be somewhat shy, wary of changes, and you change your bait structure, your selected bait, you could push those pigs off. So whatever you start with, make sure that you have a sufficient amount of bait to carry you through that whole trapping process. So another thing too to think about is if you're out there and you're on a deer stand or dove field or wherever it happens to be, and you get the chance to rehabilitate a pig with that hot lead injection to the noggin, check the stomach content. Say what those pigs have been feeding on. That might give you an idea of what you may need to think about as far as selected baits to use, or if there's something there that's a better food source that they're selecting for. It may be that you may want to back away from pushing those pigs very hard at all, so we don't take a chance on messing up and educating those pigs, and just wait for that natural food availability to subside. Like where I'm at here in Texas, we have had a lot of rain. I know that there's been quite a bit of rain along the East Coast and in a lot of places. What we may see in the fall of the year, especially as those rains start to increase, is that we'll have pigs go off bait and you say, well, I don't even have any acorns, or I don't have pecans, or the persimmons are dead this year, they're not working any, but the pigs won't come to bait. Whenever we see soil saturation increase, it's going to push invertebrates, your grubs, your worms, and things like that to the top of the ground. And again, too, that's super high protein content, and we need to make sure that we're mindful of where those pigs are getting that natural food. So then check to see just the availability. I know last year where I'm at, I could put my feet in one spot and use a leaf rake and rake up a 5 gallon bucket full of acorns without moving my feet. If there's a lot of food available, then it's definitely not the time to go out there and push those pigs to try to get them to perform, because they're just not going to do that. And then you take the chance on running the risk of pushing those pigs away. Now, the fall of the year, obviously, I think it's pretty obvious if you spend much time on the highway now, especially Labor Day weekend being behind us, and then moving forward into the fall of the year, you start seeing a lot more deer, a lot more trucks with ATVs and side by sides, or people putting their deer blinds back up. So when that happens, going into going into a lease or a hunting location that may have been quiet for 7, 8 months out of the year now, and you start showing up, then you're going to see those pigs kind of go into a flare motion there for a little while, that they don't know what the heck's going on. We got new visitors here that hadn't been here all year. So their rotations and their patterns may be pushed off a little bit until they determine what's normal for that time, that movement. So other thing that's going to be out there too is it doesn't take long for a pig to realize whenever the guns start firing in the fall of the year that they're going to change their feeding habits, and if they haven't been nocturnal, they quite likely will. They'll go nocturnal on you. And when that happens, then we need to think about the consistency, the timing, and the bait approach that's there on that slide. And what we think about in consistency and timing is if you start seeing that pigs are no longer stirring, and you don't see them on your game cameras at dark anymore, at twilight, that they're coming out at 9:30, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, rather than baiting those pig traps at 2:30 in the afternoon before you go get on your deer blind, you may want to wait and just bait them after dark. That way you can stay consistent with the timing of when you're going to bait. And then it's going to be closer to when those pigs come to that trap site where you expect that visit. By putting out that bait earlier in the day to try to trap those pigs in or get those pigs coming in, you're just going to have increased challenges with deer, with squirrels, different other species that's out there that are non-targets, just giving them more access to it. The other thing is that, especially if you're using corn for bait, then obviously you're going to be pulling those animals, those deer, away from your hunting locations. So that's something we'll talk about in trap placement in a little while. But the baiting approach, what we need to think about on here is something that I hold pretty much consistent all year long, and it consistently performs at a very high efficiency. Is that whenever I put those traps up, I get my pig brig up, of whether it's a post set or a tree set. The first time I bait that trap, about 90% of the bait goes on the outside of that trap, about 10% then on the inside. And the reason I do that is because, one, especially if you're hunting a property or you haven't been managing the pigs, haven't been on the property a lot for several months, those pigs are going to increase their awareness whenever they start hearing new sounds, smelling new odors, things like that. So whenever that's already has their awareness elevated, then you start to try to force those pigs into a piece of equipment and a trap that hasn't been there before, then you increase even more the chances of pushing those pigs away. So by baiting with the majority of the bait on the outside of the trap, to start that process, you're introducing those pigs to that trap without trying to force them in. Now, once they've eaten that percentage of the bait on the inside of the trap, they're letting you know, okay, I'm comfortable with this trap. And at that point, no more bait on the outside of the trap at all. Now, how far out from the trap do I start with my baiting? Depends on trap location. If I'm trapping along a logging road or a trail of some kind there, then I may end up taking just in applying bait for a pretty good length away from that trap, just using that roadway, because at some point they're going to cross that road, and then I'll gradually work those pigs in, especially if they're shy. Okay, so if I know that those pigs are still holding true to moving closer to when I expect them to at twilight or something of that nature, they're not going to likely be as alert or as shy. So then my bait is going to be much closer to the trap than it would be if I've got shy pigs in the area. So the baiting approach is going to be definitely something that can heavily impact your successes, and don't force those pigs to do something that they're not willing to do. So again, this is going to be some of those things you're going to have to look at the pigs that you have in your properties and make that decision. The main thing to think about in the fall of the year, or any time of the year for that matter, is patience is number one. You have to be patient with those animals. They are a very, very intelligent animal. So if you don't practice your patience and you start trying to trap according to what a wall calendar says, you need to get a memo to those pigs to make sure that they're reading the same wall calendar too. Because if you're trapping according to a date or a time, you're cutting yourself short, rather than if you watch those pigs and trap pigs according to when they're ready to be trapped. Other things that you need to think about is, yeah, we need to be patient, but don't panic. It happens quite often in the fall of the year that pigs will perform a given way. You expect them to perform it. They're doing what they have read the script, and then all of a sudden, poof, pigs are gone. And we get the call quite often is, what do I do? The first question is, well, what do I feed them to get them to come back? Well, until we find out why they left in the first place, there's nothing that we need to do yet. So don't panic. In the fall of the year, like right now, looking out my window, is we're getting our first cool front of the year, and for where I'm at in Texas, anything below 100 degrees this time of year is a cool front. So we got a pretty good cool front blowing, a good wind blowing that's there right now. And in the fall of the year, whenever those mass productions, those acorns, those pecans, things like that start to get ripe, get ready to turn loose, and we get those fronts blow through, they're going to dislodge a lot of that nutrition and put it on the ground. So a lot of times, if you'll take a deep breath, slow down, focus on what actually is going on out there, it'll tell you why they left. It very well could be that there was a cool front come through, put a lot of nutrition on the ground. As soon as they get that nutrition picked up, they'll be back. So no reason to push them, because pushing again, you're going to push them away. For those of us that's closer to the coast, this is also time of the year, and I hate to say it, it's a kind of the one of those bad words that I'm glad I can't hear your comments if you live along the coast. But we got to worry about tropical systems about this time of the year through probably mid-October. Same situation, it's just a different direction the wind's coming from, but it'll put a lot of nutrition on the ground in a short period of time. Agriculture food availability. Right now, a lot of places are, depending on what the crop is, a lot of the crops have been harvested already, wrapped up, so forth and so on. But the further north we get, there may be still quite a bit of corn out there. Soybeans are out there. I know that they'll be harvesting soybeans later on. Depending on where you're at, you may have winter wheat that's either going in the field or going in the ground, or if you're really far north, it's not winter wheat, it's summer wheat, and they're harvesting right now. So in that agriculture production and harvest, there's a lot of spillage that's going to happen that's going to cause those pigs to flare away if they're digging peanuts, anything like that. So think about that agriculture food availability before you start to draw any decisions on what you need to do or panic. Next thing is also in agriculture production, what and when. The what and when on this situation here is whenever what I'm thinking about is that, do you have a fall calf crop? Are you expecting calves to be born in the fall? If that's the case, have you had vulture issues in the past? Have you had coyote issues in the past on your calves, or even have you had pigs on your calves to cause you concern? If that's the case, before those calves start to hit the ground, then hit those pigs hard. Whenever you hit those pigs hard, take the carcasses and dispose of those carcasses away from where you're expecting the calves or the lambs or goats, whatever it is, being born, and that will focus the attention off of the calf crop or off the livestock crop by the coyotes and the vultures, giving them a much easier food source. And then obviously too, you're decreasing your pig numbers. Think about doing some of those things to increase your survivorship. Other things there to think about on the livestock side of agriculture. Not going to be long until some people start to supplement feed out there. So if they're supplementing with corn, pay attention. One of the easy signs to look at in the fall of the year, the wintertime, if they're supplementing cattle with corn, is there won't be any intact manure piles on the pasture. That undigested corn comes out of those cows in that manure pile. And quite often I get people that say, well, I don't have any pigs in the fall. They just seem to disappear. And you show up and there's not an intact cow pile on the whole property. And it's like, no, they're here. It's just they don't have to stick their nose below ground to get something to eat. They're just destroying those cow piles and picking the corn out of those cow piles. So thinking about that and leveraging your baits or your selected baits, that's something that we definitely have to make sure that we pay attention to what the agricultural production is. What did Mother Nature's put out this fall for the cornucopia that's coming, and make those choices accordingly. What I mean by candy of the day is that could be something like what we talked about with your invertebrates. If the soil saturation level is high and it pushes those grubs and worms and things like that to the surface of the ground, that's going to be your candy of the day until that ground gets cold and it pushes those invertebrates back down or it dries up, something of that nature. Then that's a thought. Now, whenever we think about the candy of the day and then go on further down that next to the last bullet right there and talk about additives, depending on what those pigs are after, if it's the candy of the day, let's say if it is invertebrates and they're going to the invertebrate, obviously they can smell those invertebrates in the ground. um, if that's the case, well, I have in the past increased my efficiencies in those less than opportune times of trapping just by going to your heart or to your local farm store and all those little cans of mealworms that people get to feed their chickens, their pet chickens that run around with the diapers on. Take those mealworms and make sure that you use the correct blender at the house. But I'll take those mealworms and create a slurry of mealworm water mixture and pour it over the corn. It's gonna be a lot cheaper to use corn as a carrier because now they can smell the invertebrates, they can smell the worms, but there's plenty of bait there that they can feed on, and using that candy of the day to dictate to you what other additives that you may want to put in there. I don't think it's any mystery that if any of you's gotten the chance to be anywhere where I've talked about the attractants or anything like that, is that I'm not really too much of a fan of attractants. And I've gotten several reasons for that, but it's just one of those things. If you're going to use an attractant, you have confidence in it, keep using it. A lot of mine is personal preference, and reading the conditions. If you've got the conditions are right, then you shouldn't need an attractant. You ought to be able to catch those animals without an attractant. Now, sometimes, though, it is something that very possibly could be a necessity. And if I'm using something as far as an attractant, make sure that it can be replicated. So if you've got if you got a recipe list on there that what it takes to put your bait together, you got to make sure you can replicate that recipe time and again, and it's going to taste and smell the same. You got a chance of pushing those pigs away. So as far as me and additives and attractants, the one that I reach for, if I use an attractant, about 90% of the time is going to be buttermilk, just straight buttermilk from the grocery store. And if I'm using that as an attractant, what I'm going to use is a quart of buttermilk for every 50 pounds of corn. So if you have the time to be able to pour that buttermilk over the top of that corn in the evening before you bait the next evening, then do that. It'll give that buttermilk a chance to soak in. It's a sweet smell, and it's super obviously easy to replicate, just pouring it out of a jug. So the other time is that in the wintertime, if you have ranchers that are feeding cattle with a molasses bait supplement, then the other 10% of the time or so I may reach for the molasses. It's just going to be a lot more expensive. But again, too, if you got confidence in what you're using for additives and attractants, do that. The one thing that I try not to ever do or recommend is if you're in the South where the ground gets hot, you know that we've got fire ants. So if it's hot weather and you have active fire ants, don't use the gel-based attractants, because if it's hot in the South, it's typically dry, and those gel-based attractants are primarily water. So if you put those gel-based attractants on the ground, the ants sometimes will quite often beat the pigs to the attractant just after the water. Once the ants are on the feed or the attractant, pigs are not going to be there. They're not coming through. What I think about on pheromones, and this is something that I've used from time to time, mainly if I'm catching boars. If I got a large boar number there, that we talked about this in that first slide. If I got a lot of boar numbers there, then one of the things I'll do is I mean, guys, I don't know how many has already bought your doe pee for the deer season this year, but what the heck do you get the doe pee for? Obviously, you want to draw the buck in, right? So whenever we're thinking about the pheromones on the pig side of things, is do the same thing if you're trying to target your boars, is using the urine from a sow or from a female. Now, don't ever pull the urine out of a female that has been caught in a trap. The pheromones in that urine will be an excited or a stressed pheromone, and those animals can pick up on it quickly and they're gone. You'll actually hurt your trapping effort by adding a stressed pheromone out of an animal that you caught. So whenever I'm using the urine from a female to as a an attractant to try to catch those boars, I'm not really worried whether or not she was in heat or not. But what I am going to do is I'm going to find somebody that's got a domestic female, and every time, if y'all have seen domestic females when they feed, or just a domestic pig in general, as soon as they get up on their feet to go stick their head in the feed trough, they're eating on one end and they're peeing on the other end. Well, if they're confident enough and calm enough to feed, then that pheromone in that urine is obviously going to be a calming pheromone. So just like a doe pee in your deer, those bucks can see that that female is not standing there, that doe is not standing at that scrape, but they're going to come to it anyway. Same concept. If you're trying to trap those boars, is that urine will draw that boar in there, and many times I've caught pigs and several boars at any given time and in a single event with actually no what you would consider a normal bait in the trap, like corn or something like that. It's literally been sponges soaked in pig pee, and they go into that trap to explore what that smell is, and then it's game over. So think about those pheromones. Other thing that we'll talk about in here a little bit more about the pheromones in a minute as we kind of wrap some thoughts up. But what we want to think about is on the actual traps themselves, is make sure that you rotate your trap sites accordingly. And for me, I don't want to have a trap probably within, I don't know, 500-600 yards if I can. Ideally, I don't want to trap within a half a mile. Because those pigs have legs, they can travel, they're going to move. We know that based on telemetry, those pigs will move a long way in a very short period of time over the course of a night to feed where they need to. So, but do have multiple locations set up. That way, you can take that one pig brig net and you can move it within trap locations pretty rapidly. If you're going to be deer hunting in the same place that you're trapping pigs, get out there now and get your post put in place. That way you don't have to worry about blowing your deer out of the area and spooking the deer and the pigs off. Whenever those pigs show up, you can ease in there quietly, hang the net, and move back out without disturbing your deer. Don't put your pig brig within probably 300 to 400, 500 yards of a deer feeder. If you're going to be hunting over a deer feeder, don't want to put that trap anywhere close to that deer feeder because those pigs are going to quickly associate gunfire in that trap, and that's going to push your efficiencies down dramatically. So all the other things they always talk about multi-trap sites is if you've got certain times of the year when you have those piglets on side of those females, or you have those bred females, they don't want to be around a boar. But if you got a lot of boar numbers in the area and you got a lot of females in the area, if you catch a big boar in your pig brig system early in the evening, those females are not going to go in that trap. And if that's the situation in the setting that you see, then you may need to put up two pig brigs within 100 yards of one another. And if you catch that big boar early in the evening, then those females are going to go to that other trap that they've been conditioning out also. So you can keep your efficiencies high in a multi-trap set. In that situation, if that's what presents itself, then you want to make sure that those traps are within 100 yards of one another. They're going to be close, so we can keep those efficiencies high. Keep both traps conditioned. Tree sets, again, too, if you're thinking of using those tree sets, outstanding opportunity to do that in the fall of the year during deer season if you didn't have time to drive your post in the ground early. Again, but on the tree sets, make sure that you get those 300, 400, 500 yards away from your deer feeders, and tuck them into some shaded cover and such. Many times those pigs won't even realize that they're in a trap, and the conditioning period can be shorter than in those post sets. Combining trap types, if you got a metal trap out there, you can combine and move in a pig brig into an area where there's another trap type already there. If that situation is exposing itself, where you got those males and females that are not mingling, and moving those animals out quickly. So The difference in overlapping sounders with regard to the Pig Brig systems and the corral traps is if you're going into an area that's got overlapping sounders. If I'm using the Pig Brig the way that I like to use that Pig Brig, if I've got 3 trap locations that I can put that net at, I'm going to look at my camera and find out where the biggest sounder comes in last. And then I'm going to condition those pigs according to the total number of pigs that are coming to that trap. So, example, if you got 3 sounders coming to a given trap location, the first sounder that's coming in, patterning themselves coming in, has 5 pigs. Second sounder's coming in, has 10 pigs in it. Third sounder comes in and it's got 15 pigs in it. Okay. Well, that's my site because the biggest sounder's coming in last. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to condition that trap to catch 30 pigs. So what's going to happen, you'll see it, is as those smaller sounders go in first, they turn into the bait in a lot of situations. Those bigger sounders are going to come in, they're dominant sounders, and not only do they want the bait, but they want to set an example that you better stay off of our resources. So if you have overlapping sounders, think about where the biggest sounder is coming in last. As opposed to corral systems where obviously if you got a corral system that you have one gate drop and that's it, so you catch as many as you can in that one gate drop, you're going to want to go to where that biggest sounder can come in first so you can get the biggest bang for your buck straight out the gate. So last couple of thoughts in here as far as adaptive tricks and things to incorporate is incorporating vegetation. That's going to be tougher for those animals to see the entire expanse of that trap, and we'll see pigs, especially that are shy, that they'll push themselves away from a trap location if they can see the whole trap. But if you're incorporating vegetation or you're using your pig brig in a tree set, then those pigs are much more likely to perform the way you want them to. They'll go where you want them at. The other thing here is intensity and duration. This is something that I've had that's been posed to me. I don't know how many thousands of times over the last 30 years or so. Is that, man, I can catch pigs first few nights of the month, and I just don't catch anything after that, and I don't know why. Well, there's several different reasons. Is that one, you could have caught all of them that was coming during the conditioning period, and you've done a good job in the first few nights. The second thing, which is much more likely the situation, is that if you haven't caught all the pigs within the first few days, then the longer you stay after those pigs, the more you're going to educate those animals and make them harder to catch. So what we do whenever we've looked at this through research, and about 98% of the pigs that are caught in a trap location are caught in the first 5 nights that trap is set. So what we recommend is that whenever you go into a location, you keep a high intensity, short duration trapping. So you hit those pigs quick and back away before they've got a chance to educate on the animals that you did not catch. So what that means is that for me, the protocol that I follow is that I'm going to condition those pigs as long as I need to try to make sure that I catch as many as I can on that first night, the first active night. Now, once I have that first active night, that's when my clock starts. Once I catch the first pig, I'm not going to try to catch pigs but 4 more nights before I back away. And in certain situations, I may even cut that down and back away in 3 nights if I see that the remaining pigs are extremely cautious. Don't push the issue. Hit them quick and back away, much like a boxing match. You want to hit them, get away from them before they learn about what you're trying to do. You may only have to back away 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, something like that. Go back in and hit them again. But whenever you back away from that trap location, what we want you to do is lift that net back up and get that pig brig up off the ground again, back in the conditioning phase, and bait that trap one more time in the center of the trap. The reason we want to do that is any pigs that are remaining in that area, we want the last memory they have of that trap location to be positive that they got a free meal. What that's going to do for you is the next time you go back in for that second round of trapping, that most times, the vast majority of the times, that's going to decrease the amount of conditioning time you're going to have to allocate to that trap location because their last memory was positive. So high intensity, short duration, hit them quick, back away. Shy pigs, if you got shy pigs in the area, make sure that your pig brig is lifted all the way up off the ground, all the way around, rather than opening up or raising 1 or 2 spots on that net. Raise the whole system up, that way they can see all the way through it. So the other thing to think about if you have one net in multiple locations is we use sham nets in places that we do need to move those nets quickly and stay on those pigs. with little downtime. And sham nets are just the way they are. They can look similar to a net. They can basically get those pigs acclimated to that trap site, and then you move the real net in there. So if you got your pig brig up at trap A location, and you know that you're going to be going to B location and to C location, then what we do is we put sham nets up at B and C location to acclimate those pigs to what looks like a pig brig trap. Now, a couple of things that you can use is for the folks out there that raise livestock, you know what shade screen is. Black shade screen works great for a sham net. Other things that will work really well for sham nets is to go to any of your sporting goods stores that has fishing supplies and buy seine nets, the bait nets that you pull, the seine nets, those black seine nets, and then use those black seine nets up on your post or on your trees, and that looks a lot like a pig brig. Sometimes we'll use it if we can't get our hands on anything and it works. Sometimes it doesn't work, or even just black trash bags and zip tie those black trash bags to about half of the post. That's going to get those animals desensitized to sight, sound, and smell. Then you can move those pig brigs in there and hang them up. That third option is the one that probably performs the least effectively, but it's something that can help you in trying to get that trap moved to new locations in a short period of time where there's not much downtime. The pheromones, again, what we think about on the pheromones there goes into also elevating the baits. Is what I'm going to use whenever I have to use a pheromone. If I'm using that pig urine, like I talked about earlier, make sure again it comes out of a domestic female. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak that a sponge or a cloth or something like that in that pheromone, and I'm going to elevate that bait and let the wind work for you. The wind is going to push that smell further down, get it dispersed further away. That's going to get a quicker response than if it's just laying on the ground. So take your pig brig trap cap and put it to use by putting those sponges or rags on the top of that trap cap. Same thing as if I'm using my buttermilk, like I referred to earlier. Soak a rag or a sponge in buttermilk and hang it in the air. Get it up off the ground, out of a tree, out of off the trap cap, wherever it is, and let that buttermilk push downwind and have those pigs respond to that buttermilk a lot quicker by using the wind. Another thing thinking about in the fall of the year, we may have a south prevailing wind now, but in a week we may have a northern prevailing wind. A lot of times whenever you get those shifts in the direction of the wind, you'll see a quick response from pigs that you haven't seen before, and it's just simply because they've been bedding in a location that's the opposite direction from where the wind is blowing. So by getting those baits up off the ground, you can definitely get that smell out there a heck of a lot further, heck of a lot quicker, and they'll respond. They may not have even known that there was anything there until that smell or that wind works for you. So that's going to wrap up as far as the content side of things on here. And I told Tony that before we got started, there was something that I needed to make sure that I brought up for tonight, specifically tonight, because all of y'all know that are deer hunters that right now is when those bucks are going to start to come out of velvet. Next few weeks, they're going to be shedding velvet pretty quickly. Now, whenever we're trapping around deer, not so much concerned about the does or the Farcorn bucks or anything like that, but those bigger antlered bucks. Whenever you're trapping, especially in the fall of the year, there's a lot of people out there that like to gradually lower the net. Don't gradually lower the net in the fall of the year. And the reason for that is if you've got a buck that's an 18-inch rack buck and he gets acclimated to going into that pig brig under the net, and you gradually lower that net, he's going to still continue to try to go under it, even if that net's only 4, 5, 6 inches off the ground. So in the fall of the year, especially, and it's not a bad habit to get into all throughout the year, either in the fall of the year, that net either needs to be all the way up or all the way down. The other thing to think about too, and especially if you're using deer feeders to condition those pigs to come in, if you got a deer feeder inside your pig brig, turn the RPMs down on the motor to make sure that it does not throw bait in the skirt of that pig brig, because the concern there is if you have bait in the skirt of the pig brig and a buck comes into that skirt material and their head is moving side to side to pick any of the bait up that's in the skirt material, you increase your chances of getting that buck hung up. So no bait inside the skirt material. So if you're hand feeding, great, put the bait in the middle of the trap. If you're using a deer feeder, then you need to turn the RPMs on the motor down. Use that varmint guard that's on there and wrap a cloth or something around that varmint guard and make that bait fall directly down onto that feeder. Third thing is be consistent in the time that you bait. Bait at the same time every day, because those pigs are going to acclimate to you. So once those pigs have acclimated to your behavior, then they're going to be there relatively quickly after that, after you've baited, and that's going to shorten the duration between the time you bait and the time the pigs show up. That's less time that those deer are going to have access to get to that trap. So it's a lot of things I know to think about going into the fall of the year. But it's one of those that after you've done it a couple of times and get into that repetition, it just becomes second nature on so many different situations. So again, too, 3 steps if you're trapping around those antlered bucks. 1, the net's either all the way up or all the way down. 2, no bait in the skirt of that pig brig. And number 3 is be consistent in the timing of your baiting. Now, if you are using feeders, or I guess even if you're hand feeding and you know those pigs are not going to come in until midnight, don't bait until after you get off the deer stand, or don't bait until after dark or sometime there to shorten that time frame between when you bait and when you expect pigs to show up. So other than that, Tony, I think that's going to wrap it up. So I think I see some questions that look like they've come in. And if you do have any questions, folks, definitely put them in the Q&A, and we're going to stay until we get those questions answered for you.
Yeah, so it looks like first question we've got here, it says, we own a pig brig in Kauai. We're having difficulties in drawing pigs into the center. We have multiple different kinds of fruits, mangoes, bananas, jackfruit, and tasty corn mash. Looking for suggestions on different types of food to bring them in. Again, they're in Kauai.
Yeah, one of the things I know whenever Randy and I and Leslie was with us too was in Hawaii. I guess a year or so ago, maybe, and there are a lot of people there that are using macadamia nuts, and I know that's something that's readily available. The macadamia nuts are something that's higher protein, draws in pretty readily. They can a lot cheaper in Hawaii than a bag of corn is, that's for sure. So the other concern or the other question that's in there too, I mean, with the fruit side of things, that's going to be tough in those more tropical environments because there's fruit all the time. And so one of the things we do notice, or I did notice on some of the pigs that were there, and talking to some of the other trappers that were there, is that there, with it being a warmer climate, there can be a lot of parasites. If you're in a warmer climate and they have a lot of external parasites, ticks, fleas, things like that, this will even work in the States or anywhere around the world. If you have ample food availability that they can chew up and swallow and get fat, but they have a parasite concern, then that's the bait that what we use a lot of times whenever we can't get bait leverage the way that we would like to, is we use oil. And the oil that I really prefer to use if that's the way I can get those pigs to respond, is looking for relief from parasites, is I use old cooking grease, fish grease, fry grease, anything like that. That oil base is going to be an insecticide that will keep those ticks and fleas off. It's also going to smell like food. So you can draw them in with that fish grease, that fry grease, something of that nature. And it's something that if you can't compete with the food availabilities, give them something else. And the other thing that comes to mind with regard to the oil is a lot of folks will use burnt motor oil, and it works fine. It really does. And the only thing that I'm hesitant about recommending the use of burnt motor oil to draw those pigs in, if you've got a parasite concern, is that we have found oil residue in the muscle tissue of the pigs. So if they're rubbing on burnt motor oil and you're using that pig as a food resource for yourself, then I think I would try to find me another oil substrate instead of using burnt motor oil. But very good question. I mean, the thing is think about what those pigs need. If they got plenty of food, the next thing is check on the parasite load. What is those parasites? What do they have out there? If you don't know if your pigs have parasites that are out in the wild part, check to see what your domestic livestock have. Do your domestic sheep and goats have parasites? Do any of your other animals have parasites? And if they've got the parasites, the pigs are going to have them too. So give them the way to be able to come in. And what I do whenever I'm baiting those pigs in using the motor oil is use a rug. Pour that oil on a rug, and it'll hold that oil a lot longer, and it's easier to clean up whenever you get finished. And then and those pigs will get accustomed to wallowing around and rubbing on that rug. Now, whenever I do that using that oil, is I'll also throw a little bait on the ground, any kind of bait you want to, because if you've got 1 or 2 pigs that are wallowing around on that oil rub and you've got 10 pigs in the sounder, they're going to be standing there basically waiting for their chance to get to that rub. Well, if they're standing there, they may not be hungry, but they're going to eat just because they're a pig. Okay, so they're gonna nibble on things to stay right there in proximity to that rub till their turn is presented. So good question. I'm glad they brought that one up, Tony. I wasn't even thinking about the oil side of it.
Definitely. It looks like the next question here is, it seems like I'm feeding every raccoon in Goliad County. What can I do to deter feeding non-pigs? They have a hot wire around to keep calves and deer out so far.
One of the things you can do if you have a raccoon issue is bury the bait. Is if you got a set of post hole diggers. I know in Goliad maybe it's a little bit damp that down there now enough to dig a hole anyway. But if you can dig a hole and get that bait down into a hole, it doesn't have to be, I don't know, as big around as a volleyball and a foot or so deep. And you put your bait in the ground and then cover it up with a couple of inches of dirt over the top of that. Typically, whenever I bury bait like that, I try to use a fermented bait or use the buttermilk like I was talking about. That way, those pigs can smell it in the ground. Now, you may get pigs, or you may get raccoons to dig a little bit to get to the top of it, but they're not gonna feed as heavily as what you would think. They just don't want to dig. The other thing to think about with regard to raccoons is you if you're using corn, go to the feed store and get rice bran. Now, rice bran, if it's in a dry state, is like a drug to a deer. Okay, so if you're using rice bran, ferment the rice bran. Raccoons do not like fermented rice bran. So for every basically a 5 gallon bucket of corn, use about 3 pounds of fermented rice bran in on top of that corn. That'll keep those raccoons pushed back. The other to think about too, it may be that you want to use the oil as also. I know that you got parasites in Goliad, so thinking in terms of a non-food based attractant that's there. The other with the raccoons is that obviously too, Tony, what we can do is get their address, email or whatnot, and email them the capsaicin recommendations there, because the capsaicin that we use, it does keep those raccoons pushed back. We have also used oh shoot, what am I thinking about, Tony? The egg solid, the emulsified egg solid,
The
and
liquid
emulsified
fence.
egg solid. Yeah, liquid fence. The liquid fence, you can get that at Tractor Supply. You can get it just about anywhere. And emulsified egg solids or liquid fence at that full strength recommendation that's on the jug. Raccoons doesn't like that too much at all either. So the other thing is if you think you need to do a little culling on your raccoon side of things, then don't do it immediately around the trap too, because again, that's going to cause concern for those pigs, and that may push those pigs back. The other thing that I do if I've got a lot of raccoons and they're giving me a lot of trouble is look at those cameras and when do you expect those pigs to show up? And if you know those pigs are going to show up at a given time, then just don't bait until a reasonable amount of time before the pigs get there, giving those raccoons less access to that bait before the pigs get there, much like what we talked about with the deer. Another good question, though.
Definitely, definitely. Next question is, what area of Texas are you in?
Right now, I'm about 150 yards from Toledo Bend Reservoir. So about an hour due east of Lufkin. So right on the Louisiana border.
Awesome. And then another question here we've got says, sometimes I have to dispatch the pigs I catch within the trap, which leaves poop, blood, pheromones, scent, and it seems like I don't get any activity for up to 3 weeks. What should I do?
Okay, good question again too. And well, that's a popular belief that you got to move a trap after you catch pigs in it. I have caught pigs in the same trap up to 19 nights in a row, and I have rehabilitated every pig in the trap. Okay, so what I do before I bait that trap again to catch more pigs is if there's any feces in the trap, that's the one thing I try to make sure I scoop out best I can. Get it away from the trap 30, 40, 50 yards, something like that, if there's any visible feces in the trap. The other thing I do as far as blood is concerned is we can talk about it a whole another meeting just on dispatching those pigs in the trap. But one, I don't use anything but a 22 long rifle, and I only shoot the pigs as they're facing me rather than an earshot or something in the side of the head, because I only want one hole that's bleeding. I don't want two. So if we're catching 20, 25, 30 pigs in a trap, you have an exit, even with a 22 long rifle, you got twice the blood a lot of times. So we can go through that as far as dispatching in the trap in a lot more detail. But what I do is that once those pigs have been dispatched in the trap and they're removed out, then if I've followed the protocol that I like to do, then that's concentrating my blood in a much smaller area. In the South, the only time that I've seen blood really be a big issue is in the summertime, and there's a lot of it. So if I shoot 30, 40 pigs in the trap and there is a heck of a lot of blood in the trap, in the summertime where I'm at, it can smell like a gut pile within a couple of hours. If that's the case, then what I do is I stomp the blood into the ground. If it's a muddy trap floor, stomp it into the ground. If it's a dry trap floor, I kick the dust over the top of it. And your soil microbes will have your blood broken down in a couple of hours. So you can smell pigs have been there, but you can't smell dead pigs. In the wintertime, once it gets below 50 degrees, 45, 50, I don't worry about the blood at all. So that's something that I go back to a sound protocol, and I establish a sound protocol pretty quickly. If I do have pigs in that area that are super shy, then instead of trapping that high duration or high intensity trapping that we talked about earlier for 5 nights, I may hit them hard that one night and back away for 2. Hit them hard at night, back away for 2, and keep them off balance rather than staying on them for a prolonged period of time. So there's things that you can do as far as minimizing the smell if it's in the summertime in the South by stomping the blood or covering it. Get rid of the feces. Wintertime, don't worry about it too much. And then the other is just speed up the intensity of what you're trapping those pigs before you back away. Hit them quick, back away. Hit them quick, back away again. Good question.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions at the moment. But one thing I wanted to ask everyone who's still here, if anyone has anything they want to hear on our next upcoming webinars, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to put that in the Q&A chat, and we'll take a note of that, and that'll help give us some ideas to fulfill whatever information y'all need.
Yeah, definitely. Don't forget, folks, just any questions that come up, you don't have to wait for the recording to be ready to come to you. If you've got questions on this or any other webinar, reach out to us. You're going to be talking to one of us, myself, Tony, Randy, or John. May talk to Margaret or Shannon. There's any of the team can definitely help you in a very specific manner.
It's not necessarily a question, but I think it's supposed to be a topic, but you might be able to explain this one here. They're asking how to ferment rice bran.
Yeah. So what I do whenever I'm fermenting rice bran is and I'm not using rice bran by itself. I'm always going to use it in conjunction with corn. So the corn is a cheaper carrier. It doesn't cost as much as the rice bran. So what I'll do is I'll take that a 5-gallon bucket and I fill it up about 2/3 of the way with corn in it, and then I'll put 3 pounds of dry rice bran over the top of that corn, and then I'll fill the whole bucket up with water. So and what it's gonna you're gonna have to do, especially going into the fall and the winter, you're probably gonna have to cover the top of that bucket, just to hold the heat in. But typically, and what you'll need to think about is only ferment enough of what you can use within about a 3-day period, because there's a difference between fermented and rotten. So if I'm going to bait, today is Thursday, if I know that I'm going to be baiting pigs on Saturday, I ferment the bait today that I'm going to use Saturday. And even in the wintertime in pretty much anywhere in the United States, if you got a black bucket and you can put a lid on it, the sunshine is going to heat that bucket up sufficiently enough within a 3-day period, you're going to get fermented bait out of that. So about 3 pounds of rice bran over the top of 2/3 of a bucket of corn, fill it up with water and let it soak, let it sit there.
Awesome. And then we've got one more question here. They mentioned that they've only been trapping for a short time in Australia, and they've only ever seen one pig in the trap at a time. It's not necessarily a question, but kind of a statement. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, one thing I would think about is it adult males or is it females? What's the gender of the pig? Because if it's adult males, that very well could be something that's expected. Those animals are very transient. They're loners, basically, and depending on the landscape type. Okay, if you're around the coast and it's wet and so forth, then those pigs may stay in a given area for a longer period of time. But if you're more inland where it's dry, it's farther between nutritional sources and such like that, those pigs are going to be very transient. They're going to move for a long way. The other question that I would have is that is is that if you're using a camera, does the camera only show that there's one pig that's coming to a trap while it's conditioning, or are there more animals coming to that trap and you just caught one? In that situation, if there's more animals and you just caught one, then we may just need to extend the period of time that we're conditioning that trap to get more of those animals inside that net before you put the net on the ground. So very good question. First thing I'd want to know is it male or female? And if it's adult males, makes all the sense in the world to me. That's just what's in the area. And if there's adult males that are coming to a trap location, then like what we talked about on the first slide tonight, let me see if we can get that pull back up, is right here on this first slide again. If you got bred females or females with piglets, they're not going to want to go where that adult male is. So if you got an adult male that's conditioning to a trap and they made it to the trap before the females did, then you're not going to catch but that one. So if you know there's adult females sounders in the area and you're catching those solitary individual boars, then you may need to go down to what we discussed right here and do multi-trap sets. So you're going to have multi-trap sites there with those traps within 100 yards of one another, and that's going to give you the advantage of being able to have your efficiencies go up if those boars are what's getting to those trap locations first. So that's an exceptionally good question. Is that and I know if you're in Australia, you're in the wintertime right now because John was talking about being cold down there whenever he was there a couple of weeks ago. And so if it's wintertime there and those pigs are stressed nutritionally, it very likely is adult males and they're getting to those traps quicker because they're hungry and those females aren't coming in. Multi-trap sets, condition longer if you know that there's pigs on camera that's just not coming in. But it makes a lot of sense to me to only catch those solitary individuals just because of the nature of what may be going on right now with behavior.
Right. And they mentioned here, they just commented back in and said that it only ever seems to be adult males and they only ever really see one pig around the trap site. So that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. That's what it is. You've got a transient male that's looking for females, and as those transient males are working through looking for females, then yeah, that's pretty much what's expected in the behavior of those animals. You're going to catch a lot of those solitaries. But the other thing though is keep in mind though is if you start moving a lot of those solitary males out of the area, then you're probably going to see some of those females start to show up, especially if they're bred and those males that have been giving them trouble are no longer there. Then they can start using an area that they've not used before. Now, the next thing to think about is once you move a dominant male out of an area, that territory that was occupied by that male is now going to be available that another male may move into that area. So basically just keep an eye on what's going on there. Keep those cameras out and moving. And if it's a big area and it's a long way to go to get there to check those cameras or to try to bait them into a site, what I do instead of going out and reading sign all the time is I'll go back to that oil rub that we talked about in that first question that come in or second question that come in is I'll take that oil rub and put it on a post or a tree and then put a camera on that oil rub. And now I don't have to go in there every day to bait a site just to see if pigs are in an area, because if those pigs have parasites, they're going to find that oil rub and you can monitor them without having to go out there in the bush looking for pigs and trying to identify if they're there or not.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that was
Good
some
deal.
great
Good question.
information. Looks like we finished up on the questions here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and close out. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Aaron, for all of your preparation and time tonight. And thank you to everyone who attended and for all your questions. The recording of this webinar, like I had mentioned before, it's being recorded and it'll be out in the next few weeks, give or take. And so please keep an eye out in your inbox. We also email about upcoming webinars, so be sure that you're on our email list. And that's all I have to say. So thank you again to everyone, and have a great night.
Have a good night.